Good day. This presentation will serve as a debrief on our work with adult learner Annie Smith. Annie was referred to us in order to gain insights into the unique challenges she might be facing and in order to best inform her instructors how to support her as she starts her career in higher education towards the goal of becoming a social service worker. Okay, before we continue, let's remind ourselves of our guiding principles here at Group 3 Consultants. We appreciate that adult learners face a unique set of issues and challenges as they make a decision to continue their education, either returning to higher education or entering higher education at a more mature age. We also understand that it's going to take a team between the student, faculty, and staff to ensure that there's student success for our adult learners. Our process with our students is to meet with the student, discuss the situation and their concerns, and then we develop solutions for the instructors that are working with that student to support them. We will share that information with the faculty and the student, and then we also propose a midterm follow-up to see where everything is at and how the student is doing, and if we can provide any more support or models for the instructors. Our philosophy at Group 3 Consultants is based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This pyramid shows how there is a base layer of needs that must be met before the higher level of self-actualization, the pinnacle, can be reached. So we use this model. It has been shown to connect needs and motivation in students. And so we use this model in the development of our plan for instructor implementation to help students through the process in higher education. So let's meet our student. So we met with Annie and she told us a little bit about what her background was and how she was feeling about returning to school. So she is a 43-year-old married mother of two. Her kids are actually adults now and have gone off to higher education themselves. However, most of us realize that that does not mean that they are out of Annie's life. Students in higher education tend to come home and late night phone calls and all of that. So there still is that commitment to her kids. She was going to go into higher education immediately after high school, but she got married and had kids instead, and so she ended up in retail. So she's been a retail employee while she was raising her kids. She has no previous experience in higher education, so this is a very different situation than somebody who's returning to higher education because she will have no experience in how to behave as a student in higher education. So while her kids have transitioned off into higher education themselves and have left the house, she has actually transitioned into being the caretaker for her elderly parents. So she has that responsibility now as well. Annie expressed to us that her overall goal is to develop to go through education and develop as a social service worker. So let's get started discussing Annie's case. So Maslow proposed that this hierarchy of needs must be satisfied from the bottom up. And so we first have to focus on these bottom two levels, safety and security and physiological needs. It is very easy to assume that a student entering higher education will have these needs met, but that's kind of a dangerous assumption because sometimes that's not true, or sometimes it is true when they start higher education, but over the time in their program, things might change. So it's really important as instructors to consider that this is a dynamic situation and to look out for some of these needs not being met. For our purposes with Annie, we have combined the bottom two tiers here in order to better plan instructor strategies to help her with these two levels. So the challenges to these first two levels basically are surrounded by the fact that she will be a student, but also a mother and a caregiver. And so oftentimes in this role, there's going to be non-academic priorities such as family, finances, and things like that that can distract from learning. Additionally, it's going to be very difficult for her to find a balance among the various roles she has. And so Annie will have to have some support in balancing her life outside of school, her life inside of school, and then also prioritizing her own needs. The key here is that these two base levels must be met and consistently met, again, reminding ourselves that it's dynamic and things can change, but these have to be met before Annie can progress through the higher levels of this hierarchy. Some supports that you could offer as an instructor for Annie. So the first one will be to have a class schedule. So most instructors do provide some sort of delivery schedule, but there are some special considerations to delivery schedule that would support adult learners. So for example, as much as possible, try to have it be student generated. And so it's understandable that students won't be able to generate things like learning outcomes for the course, but they could have some say in things like due dates. So as much as possible, giving them a sense of control by allowing them to have input on due dates, developing rubrics, and if things will be group work or online or anything like that, giving them a sense of control will help them with things like time management. Encouraging students to engage with their schedules using technology, whether or not they use technology, just making sure that they are merging their schedules in some place. So for example, I really like writing things down, so I have an old school agenda. Students these days are very into using their phones, and most phones have a calendar or schedule app. So encouraging them to have a centralized location for all of their schedules, both in school and out. And then the other thing is to stick to your schedule. So as an instructor, making sure that this is our proposed schedule and we're going to stick to it as much as possible. Understandably, things change throughout the term, and so it can be difficult to stick to it all the time. If you do have to make changes, it's very important to make those changes well in advance, explain why those changes are being made, and as much as possible, try to make those changes optional. So what that means is if you're changing a due date because you realize, I don't know, it's a really dense week for the students and you're going to extend the due date, make sure that students know that it's still optional. They hand it in the original format and at the original time. That way, somebody like Annie, who has managed to balance, her family's schedule, her parents' schedule, her schedule, and her school schedule, will also be able to stay with the schedule she's made and is not very disruptive to her if you make those changes. Time management. So because Annie has so many commitments and she is going to have to make sure that she manages her time so she can meet all of those commitments, it's very important that we support her time management. And so a couple of ways that you can do that as her instructor. The first thing is to stick to expected timelines and model accountability. So that's things like setting due dates and sticking to them. Also, at the beginning of your class or at the beginning of an assignment, make sure the students know when they can expect to hear back from you as far as feedback or marks are concerned. Also, make sure that if you say, I'm going to get back to you within 24 hours or 2 business days or whatever your timeline is for communication, that you stick to that and manage that accountability. The other thing you can do is offer training. So whether you do the training yourself at the beginning of the term or halfway through the term when things are getting a little bit dicey, or you can have someone come in. So many colleges will have a student services faculty that can come in and do workshops on time management, or at least come in and introduce themselves and say that they do have that service. That's really great strategy for students because we just can't assume that students know how to manage their time. Sometimes they might have just gotten this far on survival mode and actually don't know how to manage their time. Giving them that training can actually increase the students' perceived control of time, and then that in turn will decrease their perceived stress when they're planning studies and actually getting down to the studying. The other concern for Annie, because she's going to be so busy and she's going to have a lot of stress, is stress management and wellness. And so, she's a caretaker, she's a mom, she's working. And so we really need to make sure that Annie's taking time for herself, and we have to produce those opportunities for her, not only to encourage her to partake, but also to remind her that it's important. So the first thing as an instructor you can do is model wellness, drinking lots of water, taking rest and nourishment breaks, taking care of yourself. Then create opportunities to bring wellness into the class. So things like offering meditation and relaxation before exams, offering techniques on how to relax before exams. Also, you can do things like invite student services or recreation services into the class to discuss the programs they offer. If ahead of time you get some information about your class demographic, then they can really tailor their discussion to your students, which makes it relevant to them, and then it also makes it easier for them to start doing those things. Then the other thing is you can use wellness opportunities in teaching. So for example, if you're teaching an anatomy class, why not take your class to the gym at the campus and do a stretching class? If you're doing chemistry, talk about how energy drinks are not a good solution for students. If you're doing a communication class, you can have the students write a persuasive letter about a health and wellness service that they would like to see on their campus and why it would be important. Lastly, and kind of sneakily but very important is to manage the environment. And so you want to create an environment for your students as much as possible that is healthy and productive. Understanding that can be difficult when we're moving from classroom to classroom, but as much as possible you want to manage things like lighting, air quality, the acoustics of the room, the scents, okay, so many people are disturbed by scents, the seating arrangement, and access to technology. Research has shown that these are the things that are most distracting to students if they are not managed appropriately. All right, so our next level for Annie and for our adult learners is this next idea of love and belonging. So this is basically feeling like you have a role in the community that you're working in the classroom. So Annie needs to feel like she belongs there. Social acceptance and validation is going to be very important to her from both her classmates and her teachers. So she might start asking herself questions like, will anybody care what I have to say? Will I be able to relate to anyone? Will I be able to contribute anything useful? She might be scared of being alone, that her teacher and classmates might not interact with her. And then she might be fearful that she has no support. So is she doing this alone, or is she part of a team? So what are some specific challenges that Annie might face with regard to social and belongingness? And so what we see here is that not feeling accepted or as if they belong to part of the group will result in a sense of isolation, loneliness, and rejection. And so those are very negative emotions that are not conducive to learning and education. So obviously we want to try to counteract that. Annie is coming to higher education with no previous experience in higher education, so she's going to be very uncertain of how she's feeling about this, how people are feeling about her, and so we really have to be mindful of that. And it's very important to keep that in the forefront because this is one of the most overlooked levels in the hierarchy of needs. Sometimes it's just assumed that the student feels belongingness if they're participating, and that's not necessarily true. Sometimes they kind of fake it till they make it sort of thing. So we really have to be conscientious that the student is actually feeling accepted and belonging. In this vein, you have to be mindful. Annie is going to look to you first as the instructor. So students will often look to the instructor first to model acceptance and belongingness. And so it's very important that we keep that in mind, that we are modeling this for the rest of the class, and that will reinforce with Annie that we want this community to have the feeling of belongingness and collaboration. So what can we do to help Annie out with this? So Annie might struggle with belongingness and feeling accepted. So we have to be mindful of that need to belong and the fact that it is the most overlooked. So a couple of things that come from the theory of andragogy, which was first presented by Malcolm Knowles, is this idea that adult learners are more motivated by intrinsic factors rather than extrinsic factors. And so this is the difference of being motivated by something like belongingness or social acceptance or validation versus being motivated by a mark or a grade. Okay, so it's very important to adult learners that they have those motivational feelings, those internal motivations, as opposed to something from the outside. So we have to be mindful of that and create an environment where that can be attained. Also, we have to remind ourselves that learning needs are closely related to changes in a social role. And why that's important to us is we have to make sure as instructors that we put our biases aside and treat everybody equally, because learning needs will change if we're treating people differently, or if Annie perceives that we're treating people differently, because that takes her kind of out of the in-group, and that can create issues for her in her learning. So a couple of things we can do to create an environment where this belongingness and collaboration is fostered, and icebreakers and discussions are a great way to set that standard in the classroom, especially if you're starting a new assignment, a new chapter, even at the beginning of the course before you go through the syllabus. So if you use very effective icebreakers, so make sure they're related to your course content somehow, not just random ones, but if you use effective icebreakers and discussions, then this can help build this idea of belongingness, collaboration, and support. And then in the class itself, while you're teaching, group work. Students say they hate it, but we know it's important. Introducing effective group work can help with this sense of belongingness. So it reinforces and creates new relationships for students, which is great. And it also allows students to learn from each other, which is really good, but it more than that, it allows students the opportunity to know to share what they know. And this gives an opportunity for validation and for them to contribute to a team and to feel like they belong and that they are actually contributing to the success of the team. So learning from each other is a huge component of group work that can help with this social belongingness. They also learn how to communicate. Being an effective communicator definitely is a benefit when you're trying to feel like you belong or you're trying to gain acceptance in a group. One suggestion to make sure that group work is successful, and there's a lot of research on group work in general, but with regard to social belongingness, is to scaffold the group creation. And so what we mean by that is early in the term when students don't really know each other, we have a variety of age groups, a variety of experiences, let them make their groups. And so what this will do is, it creates a very safe environment for them to share and understand what their role is in the community of the classroom. But then later on, you start assigning the groups to expand that safe space to include other people and new people for every student. And so eventually all students will have this feeling of social belongingness in the bigger scale of the classroom. So moving on up, so if we've secured the bottom 3 tiers of this hierarchy for Annie, now we're going to work on self-esteem. And between love and belonging and self-esteem, those are probably going to be the most difficult things for adult learners that are new to higher education. Self-esteem, Annie's going to have a lot of questions and possibly lack some confidence. So as instructors, we really need to be mindful of that and help her and support her in increasing her self-esteem or confidence. So confidence is referred to also as self-efficacy, so confidence or self-esteem for Maslow's hierarchy. And then Albert Bandura is another psychologist who proposed that we would also maybe call it self-efficacy. But it's the belief a person has in their own abilities. Can I do this? Okay. It plays a very important role in adult learners. And so some challenges that Annie might face, I'm not smart enough to be here, right? So her whole adult life has not been in an academic environment. She's looking around and seeing people that have been or possibly are returning to the academic environment, and she might feel like she's not smart enough to be there. Also with confidence, if she doesn't feel she's smart enough to be there, she's going to see challenges as difficult, possibly avoid them. People with low self-esteem with regards to a challenge will even avoid those things. They perceive them as personal threats. And so they actually end up lacking the desire to overcome those challenges. However, if we can build up her confidence, then she'll see a difficult task as something to be overcome. She'll embrace the challenge, and so that's what we're trying to move towards. The other thing about confidence is the courses don't seem to support her goal. So this can be troubling to students, when will I use this in my career? And so if they can't see the connection to their end goal, then they might think that they've chosen the wrong path, and that can really affect their confidence as well. So what's really important is that as an instructor, we're going to keep in mind this idea that relevancy is needed. We have to remind Annie that, these are things that you're going to use, and not just by saying it, by modeling it, and then of course making sure our courses are designed to show it. So she needs to have a confident perspective. She needs to know she can do this and know that she has the support, which came from the social and belongingness level there. And then also know that she has the skills like time management and study skills and things like that in order to accomplish this. So what can we do? She needs to know she can do this and that she can commit to work hard. How can we do this? How can we help her? So the first thing about confidence is give credit where credit is due, and not so much, as a mark or anything, but Annie knows things. She's learned things in her life, between high school and now coming into higher education. We have to acknowledge that. And adults come into education with a lot of experience. They might not have, courses on paper from a university, but they have experience. And so that experience is valuable and very different than what youth would have. So we have to acknowledge that. And in acknowledging that, you're going to boost Annie's confidence because she'll realize that, what she has been doing is somehow related to her current work. Giving the work meaning is very important. Adult learners from the theory of andragogy, adult learners really want what they're learning to be problem-centered instead of subject-centered. So the idea of learning and doing and solving a problem and seeing the big picture versus just learning this and memorizing it for the sake of it. Okay, so these are things that we have to keep in mind as instructors. So one way we can do this and actually really show Annie that, you know, her prior knowledge is acknowledged, and we do respect that, and we know that it's important, but also to show her that what she's doing is good work, and to keep her motivated, is to assign learning contracts. And so this again is based in andragogy, but you're involving the student in the learning process. And so if they're involved in it, then it seems like it's something that they are doing as opposed to something being done to them. And you generally have more confidence when you're doing something as opposed to something being enforced on you. So a learning contract is something where, you know, students are going to sit down, they're going to plan their work, they're going to identify things that might affect their work, things that they're good at, things that they're not good at. And so this gives them an opportunity for a metacognitive analysis. So really looking what their strengths and weaknesses are. And so it identifies the strengths. And of course, anytime that you can identify a strength in something you're good at, that will increase your confidence. But it also shows them where their weaknesses might be. And when you know what your weaknesses are, you might be less afraid of them and motivated to possibly remediate them. Also, self-direction for adult learners is very important, and learning contracts really give them that idea where they can manage their own time and they can self-direct their learning. And then it has a metacognitive function, like I mentioned. So that's the idea that they can sit back and they can look at their work. How am I doing? Have I met these deadlines? You know, these are deadlines that I imposed on myself. Why am I not meeting these deadlines? And also anything that they're kind of lacking or falling behind on, they can seek out the supports. And so in the previous level of social belongingness, you know, the idea of building support of a community of a classroom, but also bringing in bringing in student services and anything like that that could help in the student gaining the confidence to have the skills to do this. So in creating their learning plan, they're going to become more self-directed and confident. It actually brings them from being what we call dependent learners to being self-directed. And so dependent learners are the ones that are having, you know, this is done to me as opposed to me doing this. So bringing them to be self-directed. It also allows them to respect and acknowledge their previous learning and previous knowledge, because if they look at something and they're like, I already know that, then they can give themselves a short timeline for that and just a little bit of review on that as opposed to hours of studying that. It also allows them to scaffold. So it allows them to say, well, I need to do this before I can accomplish that, or I need to know this skill before I can do this. And it really gives them and empowers them to do that. It also gives them that internal motivation that we've talked about before. So they are setting these deadlines, they are setting this plan, and so they're being motivated internally rather than externally by a teacher telling them what to do. So hopefully through all of these kind of tips and tricks and everything, we can get Annie as a team to this level of self-actualization. This is what we're hoping for all learners. We want these learners to meet this standard where they feel a purpose and they feel part of a bigger picture. So in order to attain this, first and foremost, we have to make sure that the base of this pyramid stays strong. So we have to remember, of course, that, you know, life is dynamic and ever changing. So we have to encourage Annie to self-monitor, but also monitor her from afar and notice if things are slipping or if things are failing, and then support her in whatever way we can. So she needs to know that these lower levels are met. And so let's move towards self-actualization, or having this this sense of purpose. So Annie may struggle with recognizing that the other needs are met. So it's important to develop opportunities where she can see that she has met things like confidence and she has met things like social belongingness. So we have to show her evidence of that. It's also very scary as a caregiver and a mother to take risks. And so part of self-actualization is being this person that embraces the unknown, that will take risks, assuming, you know, understanding that the payoff could be great, but it's still a risk. And taking risk with dependence is a very well, risky thing, right? So she's going to probably have some problems with taking the path less known and things like that, because she has people depending on her and she has to protect her family's interest. It can be difficult to make mistakes when there's potentially many things riding on that decision or that action. Lastly, some students, and possibly Annie, may not feel she's capable of self-actualization. So some people think that I'm just not that person. She might question or lack confidence that she can ever, be creative about something. I'm not a creative person, so I can't think creatively about the solution. So actually, it's been shown that some adult learners really question whether or not they're able to self-actualize or not. And so we have to definitely reinforce that she can and she should, and then we'll help her get there. So as an instructor, what can we do? A big thing is to present challenges to her in assignments, in tests, projects, whatever we're assigning, that go towards growth. So not busy work, right? So we want to actually structure in some serious rigor to what we're doing. So really push her towards growth, towards discovering things, creating things, exploring things. Again, we talked about in the theory of andragogy that these students, adult learners, want to be self-directed. They want to find their own path. And so that's what we need to make sure we're doing in our assignments and in our testing. So indifference, when someone's not being challenged, is, if they don't feel the value to this, they're going to be indifferent. So we want to make sure that we're challenging them. We also want to make sure that the student recognizes that they're acquiring knowledge on their own. So at self-actualization, they're doing things like discovering and creating and making connections. And so we want to show Annie that she's acquiring knowledge on her own, and they actually get inspired by that. It's, it's an accomplishment. You're thinking on your own, you're thinking outside the box. And so they can be inspired to pursue other avenues of self-study or just study in their current avenue better. So another thing that we can do, again, through this idea of andragogy, is to make sure to connect the learning to past experiences. So building on knowledge that they already have, or making it relevant to stuff that they're familiar with. But then also, and probably more importantly, show them how they might apply it in the future. And so that's the idea of being problem-based as opposed to subject-based, making sure that they can see where they already use this information in their lives and where they're going to use it in their own professional development or in their own careers. You can do this by doing things like connecting students to the outside world. So if you connect them to the world outside of the classroom through a variety of means, you can connect with community partners, do projects, you can have mentors from different professions come in, you can have them interview people. So making connections to the outside world will help with self-actualization and creative thinking. Also leave room for mistakes and creative thinking. And so maybe giving them some choice in assignments, letting them stumble a little bit. Some guided stumbling is always good, and giving them the choice, letting them own what they are doing, and kind of giving them the reins a little bit is very important for adult learners, because they feel empowered, they feel like they're doing it, and you are giving them the support so that they can do that. So that brings us up the whole hierarchy for Annie. And so what's really important to remember at the core of all of this is that Annie is motivated towards a goal that's consistent with self-actualization. Self-actualization is reaching your full potential and, finding your place in the world and feeling like you're important in the world. And she wants to be a social service worker. She wants to commit herself to this bigger picture and to helping people and to improving things around her. That is very much consistent with self-actualization. So as long as we can support her in the baser needs and bring her up towards self-actualization and reinforce for her that she does have the potential to self-actualize, then she's just going to be great. Her major struggles are probably going to be levels 3 and 4, and so that was the belongingness, the feeling like a part of a group, and then the self-esteem and confidence to pursue. So most adult learners that are coming to higher education for the first time really stumble with those 2 levels. So we want to appreciate that the whole pyramid is dynamic and needs change over time. And so just because, we can check some boxes at the bottom doesn't mean they'll always be checked. But levels 3 and 4 are going to take some really great support from instructors, and instructors inviting in partners like student services, recreation services, and things like that. We also need to remind ourselves it's a team effort. So to go through this whole hierarchy and maintain stability, we have to help Annie reach those needs. We have to give her evidence that she is meeting those needs, and then monitor with her that those needs are still being met over time. Many teacher supports can be simply implemented, so hopefully through this process you've learned a couple of tips and tricks that you could put into your repertoire to make sure that adult learners in general, and very specifically Annie, are having her needs met so that she can meet her goal of graduation and becoming a social service worker. So for follow-up at this point, we would like to have a midterm follow-up with Annie and any faculty involved with Annie. So that would be around midterm, possibly after midterms, just to see how she's doing, readdress any needs that might have changed, and see how she is progressing along. If you need any further support in the meantime, please feel free to contact anybody here on this list. This list is our team here at Group 3 Consultants. And we'd like to thank you again for choosing Group 3 Consultants, and wish Annie and her faculty the best of luck for the new school year.